Hi, and welcome to this video taking a look at the Chord Assistant. Now, the Chord Assistant is part of the chord track, so if you're not familiar with chord tracks, take a look at my other video, which I'll link in the description, introducing them to you. They're a really useful tool, but the Chord Assistant allows us to apply some music theory to bridge the gaps between chords. So it comes up with some suggestions based on some music theory, and while obviously we'd all like to think we know everything about music theory, I think that's probably the case for most of us, myself included, that we don't know as much as we would like, and this helps us apply that. So what we're going to do is put a chord in between these two chords. So here's my basic chord progression. I'm sure you'll agree, pretty plain fare. And we want to come up with a chord to go in between the C and the E minor. So pencil one in, there's our undefined chord. If we open that up, we see, in this case, the Chord Assistant. So we've got the editor there, which we've seen in the chord track, but if you click on the Chord Assistant, we get suggestions which the Chord Assistant is making. This is based on a few things. So at the moment, the mode we're in is common notes. So it's looking for chords which have notes in common with the previous chord. So this is the mode where it's just looking at the C major that's before this chord and trying to find notes which are in common with it. We've got three suggestions at complexity level 1. We've got the E minor and the A minor, which have got two notes in common, and the C minor, which has got two notes in common, although it's a little different because then it introduces an E flat, which is going to sound a little different because then we go back to E there. So let's just try it with an E minor. Obviously that will work because it's the E minor. We try the A minor, we get this, and if we try the C minor, we get that. A bit more interest in there. The complexity slider allows us to control how far away from the original chord our suggestions are. So at level 2 we get some which have got one common note, so let's try something. Now obviously the F fits in the key, we're in the key of C major here, so that fits without any issues. But then if you go for something like C sharp minor, the only note that's got in common is the E. Will that work? I think it depends what mood you're in, doesn't it, really? E major. This is kind of a swap for what we had earlier on with the C minor, so maybe not so noticeable in that particular voicing, etc. So we can see we've got some more unusual choices, and then when we go to level 3, we start getting 4-note chords. Some of them will be straightforward, so C major 7 obviously just adds a B to the top of that C major, so that's not going to be a real stretch. But some of the others there, a bit more out there. A flat major 7. There's some nice things in there, and the further up we go, the more out there they get. So here you can see at level 4 we've got some 4-note chords with only one note in common, and so on. And you can see we've got loads of suggestions here, so you could go through all of those. So that's the first level we can work at. Now the next mode is a gap mode. Now gap mode will take into account the chord before and also the chord after. So if we click that there, at level 1 there isn't anything which will fit with this, but if we go to level 2 we can see C minor has notes in common with both, A minor has notes in common with both, and so on. And then level 3 we get some other suggestions, and so on. Okay, so when you are in gap mode where it's previous and next, it's going to have fewer options by nearly always, because obviously you've got different notes between here, so that's going to limit that somewhat. So that's the common notes mode. The other mode is cadence mode. Now I'm going to put it into previous chord mode for cadence mode, so it displays what it's thinking in quotes here. So the other mode here is Cadence Mode. So if we click that, it then shows us how this could fit in terms of a chord progression. So we've got C, and then it could say this could be an F. Now here things get a little bit more murky because it's not enormously intelligent in this way, but it can be useful. So if you bear with me, I'll show you an example where it's a little more useful for mapping something out. So here we've got the C before, and it's saying, right, well, the next chord could be an F, it could be a G, it could be a D. That's the third chord in this, etc. So here's where its analysis kind of breaks down a little, because we haven't got a G before this, but it could be part of that chord progression. So you can pick from all these chord progressions, which are certainly interesting. There's some nice things in there. Now, if you're going to use Cadence Mode, I think often it's better to do it from a virtually blank canvas. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to move along here, and I'm going to put in 4 empty chord events. So there we are, and then I'm going to put my first one, I'm going to make that E major. So we're going to start off on an E. Now, if I now open this one up in Chord Assistant mode and we're looking at the previous chord, we can see that could be an A, it could be a B, it could be a G flat, etc. So here's where you need a bit of memory, potentially. So let's go for this one here. So we got B sus4 for this second chord. So let's pick that. And then the next chord, we're going to want to be a B and then an E. So sometimes, yeah, so there it's picked it up. But it doesn't always do this. So sometimes it will forget. It's as if it doesn't analyse far enough back. So we've got B here. And then this last one's going to be an E. And you can see here, it gives us the right chord, but not the chord progression it was talking about earlier on. And it thinks, B sus4 because there's a B before it, and it's kind of forgotten about the other chord progression. So sometimes you may have to go back and say, right, E, B sus4, B, E. It's not going to do this last one just right, but I can pick that. And then we end up with this. Yeah, which is nice enough and has been heard a million times. So the cadence mode, personally, I find a little less useful unless I'm starting from a blank canvas, but it's still often you get to the end of the chord progression and it's forgotten what it's talking about when it's working with, let's say, these 3, and maybe you have to go back to this one and go, E, B sus4, B, E, etc. And you can see, particularly because this particular progression, you can get chords 2 and 3 swap round depending on what's going on. So it's possible to get a bit lost depending on what's happening. So that's my introduction to the Chord Assistant. Now, there's also the proximity and circle of fifths mode, but to be honest, I don't find them hugely useful. I find this list mode here is much more useful. In proximity mode, it's drawing this information, and this is useful for understanding where you are in the cycle of fifths, but I really find the list mode is much more useful for creating music using the Chord Assistant, whereas circle of fifths and proximity mode are not something that I get on with. Cue the flames from people who love them. But anyway, hopefully that's given you a brief overview of how you can use the Chord Assistant, and you'll be able to start using it in your own projects.